Hello and welcome to Elevate, a podcast on RevOps brought to you by Aptitude8. I'm your host, Connor Jeffers, Aptitude8 CEO, and today we are very excited to have with us Ryan Finkelstein, the RevOps team lead at Aptitude8. Ryan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Great
Of
to be here.
course. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Salesforce versus HubSpot as a CRM in 2021. But before we jump into it, Ryan, can you share with us a little bit on professional experience prior to joining us at A8, and then a little bit on what you sort of focus on with you and your team in your role today?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is in sales ops and rev ops with a dash of sales, having worked mostly in the SaaS world, along with a little bit of consulting prior. Spent quite a bit of time working with both platforms that we're going to talk about today, HubSpot and Salesforce, leading I don't know, dozens, let's say, of implementations across both. And today I manage the RevOps team, which mostly does HubSpot and Salesforce implementations, along with larger consulting projects, along with some larger integrations. We work with SaaS companies, product manufacturers, and a whole host of other businesses. And our ultimate goal is to help orgs connect all their systems, and usually it involves one of the two platforms we're going to talk about today. So
For sure.
pretty excited
And
about
I
this.
think for folks listening, and Ryan and I have been looking forward to this for a little while as well. For folks listening, so we're going to primarily on both platforms in 2021. So both Ryan and myself started our careers working entirely on Salesforce long before HubSpot as a CRM platform existed, and HubSpot was sort of the blogging and email tool as we knew it 10 years ago. Has changed recently, and I think for maybe a starting point is from your perspective, Ryan, like what's the epochs of sort of HubSpot as a platform? Like when did HubSpot become like, hey, we have a legitimate CRM and not just like a whole bunch of contact records?
I'd say pretty recently. I think they first released their free version 14 or 15, something. I mean,
I think
so a few
something
years
like that. Yeah,
ago,
it's like four
their
or five
free
years ago.
version, and to whatever extent it was a CRM, I think really was just exactly what was already there to a small extent with the Marketing Hub. But very quickly, I mean, they've clearly invested a lot of time and money and energy and thought into developing this. And I think that the big transformation was releasing their Sales Hub tools. So things like sequences and connecting your calendar. I think the HubSpot calendar, the HubSpot meetings tool is arguably the best one that I know I've used. So I think that really changed the game, and people started thinking about, hey, actually use this. Organizations that are slightly larger than a one-person shop could use this for their business operations. But they've really come on very strong in the last year or two.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So the angle that HubSpot has sort of come at this from is building tools for that end user and sort of doing that like product led experience of how can we get individual sales reps or how can we get individual managers to go and use this tool so that their teams can do their jobs easier, do their jobs. But I think like the meetings tool of like, oh, now I can just like send someone a link and that's great. And that's I honestly, the speed with which things are getting commodified has increased dramatically, right? But like that was a significant differentiator 18 months ago, even 2 years ago. And I feel like
Yeah.
now everyone has something. But tools like that to be able to allow for those people to do their jobs a little bit easier and that being sort of their way in, which I think from a persona type of angle, right? You have those individual sales reps that are loving the tool. Obviously lagging behind a little bit for the ops folks, but that's changed a lot in the last year too, right?
Yeah, tremendously. And just want to touch on what you were just saying. It's a conversation I find myself having internally and externally all the time. HubSpot clearly is focused on the end user, and I think even if you go back to when they were just a marketing product, weren't necessarily the most feature-packed product. I mean, usually had pretty much everything you need. There were, a couple products that maybe can do a little bit more, but their mindset has really always been it needs to be usable to anyone that can actually come on here. So the products are designed in an incredibly intuitive fashion, and I think sometimes additional features are withheld or delivered very slowly, just so they don't affect the user experience. It's a totally different, um, totally different delivery than Salesforce, which is the other one we're going to talk about today, which is let's get everything in here and make it a much more operational focused tool rather than a user focused tool.
I think
Super,
there's also
super
an
interesting.
element, right? That Salesforce side is like build whatever you want. But I think the big piece there is like build is the operative word. And I
Yeah.
think we always saw, and I remember, and we as an organization, right? I mean, we started out doing Salesforce builds, and then our sort of foray into HubSpot was as a marketing product we plugged in, and sort of we growth of HubSpot as a CRM platform and doing a lot more work there. But I remember even in the early days, and it still happens today, that we see people who either we sold Salesforce to or they bought Salesforce and now they're like, wait, I need to pay an implementation partner like 30, 40, 50, 100, 250,000 millions of dollars, depending on the size of your company to actually make it usable. But like the operative word there is really build, right? Like when you log into Salesforce on day one, you can't do much.
Nope. It's like here's a plate, and here's some meat and some vegetables, and you could make anything you want. So some
Right.
people, I think that have a ton of experience and come into that saying, okay, I know exactly what I need. I want to be able to come and shape whatever I want, and make it potentially more rigid. But I know exactly where I want to go. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. But on the other hand, HubSpot, and again, I think this is where that user focus really shines, is that they're going to come in and say, here's exactly how you should actually run your CRM. And you're going to have a little bit less, flexibility there, but it's built so that everything will flow nicely. One of the big pitfalls, and I think there's a lot of really great things that Salesforce does, but definitely the biggest pitfall is Salesforce, no matter how much you tune it up, it will never, ever come close to usability versus HubSpot. I
I
think
think
we'll
that's
talk more about
definitely
the
true.
opposite side of that argument, but
Totally. And I
yeah,
think it's both ways. But I think the thing that is if so we'll give HubSpot sort of like a win in the usability category. And for
yeah,
anyone who is unsure, you can set up a trial on their site, go log in, and within like 30 minutes, you'll be able to figure out like, oh, cool, I can send emails from here and I can send calendar invites. Like I can actually go and configure this and make it do what I want. If you set up a Salesforce trial, and Ryan and I both love Salesforce, we'll talk extensively about
yeah.
what it does really well. But there's no way that within a day you're going to be able to do most of those things, if any of them. Both because Salesforce either doesn't have that end user like tooling functionality and you're looking at adding on other products, but also just in terms of complexity. So I want to talk a little bit about if we give HubSpot sort of a solid win in the usability section, where do you see where does HubSpot get weak, right? So does that over focus on the end user sales tool compromise on sort of that operator or the operations folks? And then how do you think that that's either has changed recently or where do you see that going based off where it is right now?
It's definitely changed, but I would say without a doubt, from as a person who spent time in an ops role and in sales roles and being at a management role, Salesforce wins hands down today, and probably for the next couple of years. I think HubSpot's making really big inroads on that front, so they're definitely making a play at it. The interesting thing I think with HubSpot right now is that they're stuck in kind of a not stuck, but they're in an interesting place. They're trying to go up market, cater more to operations, looking at bigger organizations, but they've been really successful, which is also what gets me excited. They've been always really successful at like delivering a product, saying, here's some customization, but like we know what you need and here it is. And you don't really need anything else, right? We're going to give you exactly what you need, and you're not going to think about it. And I think that that's sort of at odds from an operational standpoint because there's so many types of businesses out there, and so many people need to do different things. They have different apps they need to integrate. But I think releasing Operations Hub, which was this year,
So operations up is this year, and I think the two things
this year
to
was a
your
huge,
point, the
huge
speed
change.
here is crazy, right? I mean, so
Yeah,
for last year at Inbound, they launched custom objects more generally. You have you can build whatever, and that was huge. We talked. It's huge. If you're new to our content, then we have we have infinite articles on why we think
yeah,
that's awesome. But you can sort of customize the data model to what you need it to do. But I think the operations hub piece is key too because now you can actually write code. So instead of like to your point, HubSpot says you show up and they say thing that we think that you need. And up until this year, that's what you had. If you were like, hey, Hubs, I actually need something else, they'd be like, oh, that's crazy. You should submit a feature request. Like maybe we'll build it one day.
Yeah,
And now you can code it, you can build whatever you want. And we're seeing across our team, and I think in the market in general, people building really, really impressive on top of it, because you can now expand it the same way as sort of you might do in Salesforce with some custom functionality as well.
exactly. And your users can do it. I mean, so you can have someone who's technical come in and write some code to do certain things, but you're still leveraging HubSpot's maybe slightly less functionality, but from a user standpoint, much more user-friendly workflows and those types of things to go in and actually build what they need. But you can still communicate with your apps. You know, someone closes a deal, it kicks off, creates an account in an app, and all of that's possible now in HubSpot that wasn't possible prior to that.
So where do you
it
see
is definitely
Salesforce
changing.
excelling right now? So if you're
I was just
like,
going to say that,
go for it.
yeah, the gap. Salesforce still excels where HubSpot has a big gap, and I think it's from an operational standpoint. One operational standpoint, so the ability to maybe lock down the org isn't the best way to put it, but to
Like
control
permissions, some of those
visibility,
like data
permissions,
stuff.
permissions, and also consistency as well. So having things like validation rules and those types of things not to govern the process, I think really makes a huge difference to keep data cleaner, not necessarily totally clean, but that certainly helps. I think there's a little bit of the other side of too much of that obviously can create a bad user experience. But
Anyone who's ever
from
been
that
in a
standpoint,
Salesforce org knows the dreaded like red error
what
message.
can
You
I
don't have
say?
access to do this
Yeah,
field.
exactly. So I think that there's look, that's just poor implementation, or not poor, but that's just the struggle with implementation sometimes. But I think by and large, the ability to control permissions and Salesforce's ability to do all of that is vastly superior and not even close to what HubSpot can do today. And then I think the other major thing, which I think HubSpot is trying to get there, but is the platform, right? So the exposure of parts of Salesforce to developers, consultants, and all of those types of things that you can build. I mean, really anything. Salesforce is a totally different animal when it comes to their platform, and building entire apps on Salesforce that can do virtually anything. I think gives a lot of power to kind of bring everything together. Obviously, they've made a ton of acquisitions on that front, so their ecosystem is significantly larger and more capable today. So, it depends on where you're at from an org standpoint.
To your point, right? Like the main piece that I sort of this is surface level. So to take out that you're going to invest in any folks like Ryan or building out some additional functionality or other pieces, like table stakes. If you go to Salesforce, and I use this metaphor, I feel like all the time, but I think that it's HubSpot IKEA kitchen of you can go there, it's pre-built, you can set it up yourself, you can customize your cabinets, you can change some things around, it's got kitchen effects, and you can put whatever else you want around it. And like Salesforce is a trip to Home Depot with lumber and pipes and faucets, and there's like anything you could possibly imagine you can build, and that matters a lot, right? I mean, I think if you're a giant organization and getting something perfect matters tremendously more than both the investment up front, but also your ongoing management costs, then that makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you're a builder, you're fundamentally, you're building a subdivision, and like you any of those compromises. Where on the other side, I think if you're, and it's most businesses in some degree, right? Not that there's a lot more money to be made at that upper end of the market, but that most business fall into the category of they really do need an IKEA kitchen, and they might need it to look a little different. They might need it to be shaped a little different. They might need it to fit in a different type of place, but most of what they need is going to be there, which I think is a pretty stark difference.
I think it's a great example for sure. I mean, maybe you don't want the IKEA kitchen because you want a certain wood type of cabinet, but hey, look, you're going to paint them anyways. It doesn't matter. I built enough stuff in my house to know that most of the time you wouldn't actually know once things are painted. And the reality is, it's going to hold up just as well. It'll look just as nice, and in the end, you've saved a little bit of money, but also peace of mind. I think is the other big part of that. Ultimately, HubSpot, I think, has enough flexibility for most orgs, especially at sort of the mid-tier and below for sure, that maybe there are a few sacrifices, but most of those sacrifices probably are not mission critical, and the benefits far outweigh the cost. For a lot of orgs, and it depends on your Salesforce and those types of things. But it's a very interesting dynamic where they're growing, and I could certainly say maybe use both, but that's not the discussion here, right?
Sure.
It has to be one or the other.
And we do, right? I mean, that's something
Yeah.
that is like we're partners with both. We use both, and I think where we use HubSpot is that sort of that front end customer experience tool, right? Still a CRM. It's where our salespeople work. It's where our marketers work. It's where we track and manage like what have we sold and what interactions are we having with people, and then we're using Salesforce as a far more back end operational management analytics product that helps us sort of track what are our projects, what's our time logged, what's the cost of that time. Almost like ERP type functionality, but I
Yeah,
think
you
that
can
the
do
cool
everything.
part, right? And I think that's where Salesforce
You can
excels,
build
right? It's
it.
like formulas, objects, like you can build really complex stuff. But I also know that that was the tool of choice only because a lot of the folks that are in operations roles, including myself for the org, like have a tremendous amount of Salesforce expertise. And so I think that like if we were a different type of company where our people didn't know that already, like it would be ridiculous for us to
You'd be like,
build this thing and so
it doesn't make any
expensive.
sense. I have to edit
Yeah.
this in 7 places to do one thing. I don't need to do this. It's not that important. Like,
It's not that important to me.
yeah,
We talked a lot about so HubSpot wins user experience. Salesforce, obviously, in terms of like depth of customization, for most organizations, that's not as essential. Where do you think HubSpot like wins? Like not from a maybe this is cheaper, maybe it looks nicer, maybe it's easier to use, and I'm willing to make some of those compromises. But where do you think HubSpot just like crushes it and is so significantly different than something you would look at in like a Salesforce stack?
from an org standpoint, or from just a functional standpoint.
Like functional product org, like where do you think HubSpot's just like if you're trying to build something like this, like HubSpot's just like the place to do it and take out any of the sort of other criteria that we talked about.
I mean, definitely, it's something I know we've talked about. If I need a user portal component for whatever I'm doing, so a customer service portal, I'm going to build it on HubSpot and then have that integration there for sure. Much better product, easier to use. I think the capabilities there, especially over the next couple of years, will be so vastly superior to Salesforce. Maybe there's a level at which, and you could actually probably speak to this a little better, where you might be limited from a hierarchy and pure data standpoint. But if I'm building portals, so I can combine, I guess, the power of the marketing and some of the data behind it, I'm going HubSpot for sure.
And is
Again,
that's all CMS Hub stuff, right?
correct. That is all
Yeah.
CMS Hub. So I think there's a ton that you can do there. Having spent time working with enterprise level portals, I can say that the power that you have there is unbelievably incredible. And whatever HubSpot shortcomings has from a functional standpoint, I think are made up because you can do a lot of things on the front end. But I definitely would go that way. If you have an external facing business and you only can pick one product, I would definitely pick HubSpot.
And I think in terms of like types of businesses there, right? So like we see this all the time, like marketplaces, like if you have people who are if your CRM data isn't so much about just managing like your internal folks, but you sort of have people who don't work at interface with your CRM. And I remember I feel like when Salesforce Communities was first announced, this was like this game changing, like, oh my God, like we have the CRM, we're going to open it up to our partners. We're going to have a customer community. We're going to have like a support community. And Salesforce Communities, I remember like we took on a bunch of those projects and like, let's not do these because they're so hard and so complicated and you just like can't make them work the way you want them to.
Yeah.
And it just like did. And I feel like that's why Salesforce ended up like buying. Now you can build a full web application, but now you're into like custom web development, like is where you have to be at to build anything. Yeah, totally different animal.
That's where Salesforce lives. There's no question. They're going after a different type. I mean, there's plenty of smaller orgs, but they're going after, right now at least, a much more sophisticated organization that has full development in house and all those types of things. But I would touch Salesforce Communities with a 10-foot pole, quite candidly. I think it's a terrible product.
Totally. And the thing
I like and say it's not a good product. If I need to build a portal, I will integrate into Salesforce. I will not use Salesforce Communities.
I'm super excited, and we haven't seen much of this yet, but I do think you're going to see. So now that you have that custom object sync back into Salesforce from HubSpot, I think you're going to see CMS solutions that are like built on HubSpot, pulling in that Salesforce data to surface it, because the things like procedurally generated pages, right? So like you can automatically generate a page on your website. You can throw it behind a login if you want to, based off of object data. Like, I mean, I think just before this, I was talking to our internal marketing folks about like, oh, like if we wanted to publish case study site, like how would we do that? We're like, oh, like we make a case study object, we put in the like 5 fields, and then it just generates one on the site. But you can extend that to so many other pieces, and then have people interact with them. So like deal portals, like we're seeing lots of cool stuff with people building partner portals and deal portals and customer portals.
Yeah.
People can not only see that information, but then edit it. And instead of that being edited somewhere, and then now you're trying to go and reconcile it, it's just literally the CRM solution, which is like, I don't know, I think it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, well, it allows for a much more dynamic delivery of data too. So, I mean, it can be really just everything's driven off of your CRM. HubSpot's tools are pretty easy to use, even if you're a developer. Like, why would you not want something that's relatively easy? You can still do all of the things that are at a technical level, but being able to generate something that is more of a template sort of format, and then deliver things that are purely data driven, and allow you to create a completely dynamic experience based on the user, or things that, if you can do in Salesforce, they're extraordinarily tough. And I've worked with, like I said, other enterprise portal platforms that you can do it, but the amount of development effort that it takes to do it, and computing power, and the actual delivery of it is not good. And these are some very successful portals, and I think HubSpot really has a huge market there. That's
I think
probably
the other
untapped.
piece that's really will probably win, right? I know that like CMS Hub is, and it's early days for all of this, but I think that CMS Hub is something that was built to take on WordPress, be a marketing site builder. But the fact that you can extend that to all of these portals, and you're not trying to go build like communities, and it uses a completely different framework than web development. And so like build a successful community is like be a really advanced Salesforce consultant and a web designer, and have like a pretty good grasp on like JS and HTML. Whereas like with HubSpot, it's just like, hey, do you know how to build front end sites on things like WordPress? Because we can help you do that here, and you can connect it to all that functionality. Easier sort of like skill set to access.
I actually want to capitalize on that. It's very, very, very important thing for anyone that's, let's say, deciding between the two. If you have to pick one, you also have to think about staffing at some point, right? So you're going to have to support the usage of the system, the build out, and all of that. And while there are definitely less people that are hyper familiar with HubSpot from an operations standpoint, a management standpoint, training people is slightly easier. But also from, we're talking CMS Hub, developing, you only need to know one framework and one set of tools. You don't have to learn a million different ones that are all different and brought together from different companies over the years. So the learning curve is definitely less steep.
I think that translates to cost of ownership too. And
yeah.
I to give Salesforce credit where credit is certainly deserved, right? I mean, it is a infinitely vast, infinitely capable solution, and like you're really never going to run into, or at least rarely, to be fair, like, hey, we can't solve that problem. It's going to be, no, we can do that. It's a lot of hours and it's a lot of money, but we can definitely make it happen. But I think that as a result, complexity generally rises. And on the HubSpot side, you might get a lot more of do that today, but anything that you can do is going to be significantly easier to build and maintain. And that cost of ownership is really where I think a lot of companies get bit long term.
Yeah, I can think of it like this. So again, with mostly because of my background, if I'm helping to deploy something across an org, and I need salespeople or marketing people to use it, and it's pretty out of the box, I'm choosing HubSpot. It's easier to document, easier to follow for the user, without a doubt. Like the biggest problem that I've solved with HubSpot is actually getting people to use the system. There's no question about that, especially salespeople. But if I use like Medic or one of those different sales systems, and I need a very customized experience, again, it doesn't have to be sales, but that's just the general example that I would use. I really create an entirely custom experience that's unique to my org, especially if I have a huge amount of people in the system, and I need something that's top down, consistent, very detailed, and very specific to my org, I'm going Salesforce every time. Like not
Yeah.
even a question. HubSpot is not even close to there yet.
But I think to your point, right? I mean, that's the difference between are you going to be are you an organization and you look at your operational tools as something that's built and designed so that you can your end users to do their job better. And I think that that's
Yeah.
like one philosophy, and then I think the other philosophy is like we're going to, and I think that this matters in terms of dollar investment too, right? Are you going to invest in more expensive upper level managers, operations folks whose job is to think about what is the journey that people need to be moving through in their day-to-day lives? What buttons should they be able to click? What are those journeys they can have? And then I'm going to build that. But I think that the flip side of that is you get scale, certainly. So you can have a giant team in South America of phone agents who answer the phone and say, oh, what phone do you have? Okay, I'm going to click the Apple button. Okay, do you have a 9, a 10, or 11? Okay, you have an 11. I'm going to click that button, and it's just going to like guide me down this path. And you get scale there, but at the same time, you have to overinvest senior, expensive operational folks who are going to build, maintain, and manage those systems. And you're going to need to hire, and this is the reason that like Accenture has giant Salesforce practice worth billions
Yeah.
of dollars in revenue a
Well,
year,
because what
right? Because
happens when
all
you
these
change?
companies,
What happens when
right,
you
all these
change?
companies are paid to do it. Like
Yeah.
it's incredibly hard, and I think it makes you less agile. And if you're a giant organization, how do I control and manage process adherence over giant swaths of people? Salesforce is an amazing product for that. I honestly don't even think anything compares.
No.
And on the flip side, if you're a growing organization, maybe you're earlier in your life cycle, you aren't a $1 billion company yet, and you're figure out like how can I iterate quickly? How can I empower my users? How can I make them more successful and productive? HubSpot's going to give you a lot more ability to do that easier and probably at a lower.
Yeah, and we're at a really interesting inflection point where I think HubSpot is very clearly going after some of that business. It'd be very interesting to see over the next couple of years, like how much inroads they can make in that period of time. But Salesforce is not slowing down. There's no question about that.
Do you think it's mindset change? Like, does HubSpot have to convince? It's kind of like I think about it as like that Apple Microsoft dichotomy, right? Like, does HubSpot need to convince employers, hey, you need an easier to use, like more better looking, better feeling, more adherence, like, and that matters. And so we're not gonna overinvest in some of the areas that Salesforce does, and we're gonna that our philosophy is better, or do you think that they're gonna have to win at like a feature parity level?
It's honestly something I think about all of the time, to where clients will ask. I mean, this anytime in my experience with HubSpot of just I need to be able to do this. Well, you can't do it. I mean, HubSpot does a lot, obviously, but there are odd requests that come across that are they're extremely detailed and unique to the org, where you just can't do it in HubSpot. It's not possible. Maybe there's a workaround, which is a lot of times just as good, but I always just think, like, isn't HubSpot trying to go up market? Like, how come they haven't developed in this area? This is absolutely critical, thinking about from an operations standpoint, like on a permission standpoint. They've done quite a bit of development and product releases on that front, but they still have a long way to go. And I know obviously the ability to develop and release features is limited, but sometimes I stop and I'm like, why doesn't HubSpot do this? Or they don't want to do this. The product manager will clearly say, like, we're not going to do this. And then I stop, I think, and reflect on it, and I just think, I probably always said this about HubSpot, but what the hell do I know? They're remarkably successful. You and I think, talk about it all the time. I use an Android phone. I've never owned an Apple device. Just I like the customization aspect of it, but I can't knock Apple. Like, they have a remarkably well-built, sticky ecosystem because things work. So like, people don't care. And I know it's a little bit different because you're talking consumer versus business. So some of those things don't matter, but so I sometimes find myself getting down on HubSpot, which is obviously, what do I know? They've been successful with this model. Like I said, they did not always necessarily have the most feature packed product, although competitive enough where they had most of the, if not all of the features that you really needed. Maybe other products did a couple of additional things, but user experience has been so great, adoption is great, and ultimately that ends up winning out. And yeah, I mean, we'll still complain about not having certain features that Salesforce might have or other products might have, but it's a very interesting mindset that they have, and I don't see them straying from that, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think that they
I think it's a
they can.
strength.
It seems crazy to me that anyone could do that, maintain a great user experience, but also have enough to service an enterprise org, and they've gotten to where they are in a complete surprise to me. And I'd be shocked if they don't continue to do it.
For sure. Well, I'm going to wrap us up. I think our conclusions are you're preset in all your processes. You're looking to manage, you're looking to control data security, and those are the things you care about most. Salesforce is the place to be. And if you're looking for something that's a little easier to use for your end users, gives you some customization and functionality, but also is going to come with most of what you need already pre. HubSpot's a great choice, and we'll let the war continue to play out across the board. But Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today. If anyone wants to find you online, what is the best place?
My LinkedIn profile.
Cool.
For sure.
Well, thanks
Just my name.
everyone. just the name, Ryan.
Yeah.
I'm Connor. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thanks
Bye,
a lot,
everybody.
Connor. Have a good one.